Okay, due to some reason, some glitch, we couldn't record the initial part of the session. So I'll just quickly go through it very briefly. So we were going to talk about experimental education, um, and the reason why I thought this is a topic that needs to be discussed because all schools are in regions where education is received very differently. So every school has a different background, every school has a different setup of students, teachers with very different, vastly different backgrounds and social strata, economical conditions, and different stories, so to speak. Um, so it is very necessary to have a kind of education. Now, this is not a system of what do you say, a pedagogy, so to speak, but then it's a practice. Experimental education is a practice. So it's very necessary to have a practice that is pertinent, contemporary, and evolving. So it is relatable to the people who it is catering to. It is contemporary, that is, it is current to the scenario, like the social media is right now very prominent. So it takes into consideration that the technological advances that we have currently, the kind of interactions that people have with each other, the kind of relationships that people have with each other, the time, because of the whole work environment, work culture, and so on, the family environment, and all these things. So it is contemporary and relatable to that particular time. So pertinent is related to the geographical and geographical and terrain and social strata. Contemporary is social strata and the time, so to speak. And also, as I mentioned, that it should be related to the evolution of learning, considering the future. For example, right now, when there is a crisis of not crisis, but then we are yet to find a healthy balance between social media and social life, so to speak. Um, but we are getting there. So once we do get there, again the need for education will change. So it is necessary to have a practice or have a system which will help us integrate that, consider that into an education system which again will make it relatable in the future. So it has to be an evolving educational practice. So we discussed a little bit about the parameters of learning and the theory of education. So if we have to consider education in this manner, we also have to consider what makes up education. From the point of view of the start of learning, the beginning of learning, to the pinnacle, at least our understanding of the pinnacle so far. So, which is why I made this scale to help us understand how it works. So, to make it relatable, I'll just talk about this experiment, which has been performed on slime mold. So, slime mold are known to be very highly adaptive creatures, and so this experiment talks about introducing slime mold on a plate, on a culture plate, and it likes oats a lot. So they put a maize, and on one end they put the piece of oats, and on the other end they introduce the slime mold. So the slime mold very intelligently looks around and feels around and finds the correct place where the oats is and then consumes the oats. But the same thing, it checks the same mechanism works if there is a smelly piece of blue cheese on the plate. The difference being that it does not like blue cheese at all. So it will sense that there is blue cheese on the plate somewhere in the maze, and it will jump out of the plate. It will come out. And on the third form of learning is if you have regular blasts of hot air being given to hot and dry air, being given to the slime mold, then it will harden. So now, if you do this repeatedly, it is observed that the next time, even if you do not give the hot air, it still hardens. So this form of learning is the stimulus sense or data, or which will later on lead to information, storage of information. And so data stimulus, collection of stimuli form data, collection of data form information, and collection of information into clusters forms knowledge. Yeah, okay. So when you do start living this life, all these knowledge clusters start integrating, and they they help your life become more smooth, easier, or um, not exactly transcendental, but evolving. Like it keeps improving. And with these applications, when you notice, that, okay, this application is not universal. This knowledge cluster, if I apply in every place, it doesn't work. So then that helps you assimilate. And this assimilation again causes a kind of transformation in your view, in your perspective, that the next time you see a certain object, you look at it differently. You do not just react to it. You do not just um, interact with it, because that is how you have been programmed because of the previous senses of learning. But you make conscious decisions. So that is a transformation. That is a shift in perspective. And then this forms a philosophy. So now, for the first time, you are not looking at things, you are looking at systems. Now you're looking at living as a living system. Like, am I okay with life? What is happening around me? What is the impact of things as they are, and so on. Which later on, when it connects with other things in life, it becomes spirituality. So when you realize that, profound concepts like we are not alone, or we are not individuals, like, we are not one, basically. We are a world, or we are an ecosystem, things like that. And these learnings happen through perception in case of stimulus to information, and in case of knowledge and application, it is intelligence, which is what we normally refer to, right? If you are intelligent, you should be able to do your job. If you are intelligent, you should be able to get marks, or if you are intelligent, you should be able to do this or do that. So all this is our common understanding, or lingo for intelligence. Later on, when you are able to learn from that experience, from those applications, and go back to the knowledge, add to it, again come back to assimilation, again go back to knowledge, when this cycle happens, that is experience. When you are able to integrate various aspects of life, when you are able to integrate various concepts, or various streams, or various say things like, science and math, and in language and arts, whenever you are able to integrate all these things, then it creates an experience, and that is experiential learning. So again, in this case, it comes with reflection, it comes with evolution of these knowledge systems, and so on. Then after that, the philosophy and spirituality is when wisdom comes into being, or this comes because of wisdom. So one very typical example that I like to bring up is how Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. So this is a very famous concept, like where Archimedes started, just jumped out of the bathtub and started shouting "Eureka, Eureka!" Alexander Fleming, when he noticed that there is some contamination, there is something wrong with my petri dish which I was making, and he noticed that there is a very strange behavior, that whatever is growing around this contamination, not alien, but then, yeah, in a way alien, because that is not what he was putting on the plate. He noticed that it's behaving strangely, and his expression was not of eureka or discovery or anything. He just said, that's funny. So, you look at life in a different way. You do not crib about it saying that, oh, I spent so much of time making this dish and it got contaminated. It got something that I didn't want growing in it. You look at everything with interest and with purity and with consistency. So, this is where wisdom comes in. That is part one. Now, the part two of wisdom is when he finally did make penicillin out of it. So, that is what, for those of you who may not be aware, that is what he's famous for, penicillin. He made the first antibiotic, penicillin, out of it. Um, Again, this was somewhere around the war time. So, he had the opportunity to capitalize on it. He could have earned from it a lot, but he didn't. What he decided to do was to leave it open. He didn't patent it. He didn't patent the process nor the product, um, so that more people could live. So that the calamity that the war was posing uh, got reduced significantly. A lot of people who could have lost their lives didn't. So that was the wisdom. If he wanted, he could have just patented it and sold it to everyone and become a very rich person. So this is how wisdom works and how it contributes to philosophy and it contributes to spirituality. And when you speak about education, so education is this whole journey from stimulus to spirituality. It's not just learning, it is not just schooling, it is not just scoring marks and so on. So when we look at experimental education, we need to look at this entire journey. We cannot just single out one or two aspects of it. Okay. So what are the parameters of learning and how does it work? So this is more or less, this is something that we have already discussed in the previous slide. But just to try to make it a bit more tangible. So perception is something that deals with your senses, so sensorials and so on. That is your sight and hearing and taste and skin and whatever. Then it is the stimulus. It is basically everything that you experience, whatever is around you, whatever you are able to interact with, and storage. So both these things, both when the stimulus comes to you through your senses and it is stored, this whole thing is perception. Then intelligence is when these various stored things are correlated. There is a bridging that happens and it forms knowledge clusters. Then experience is when you apply this, you reflect on whether that application worked or not. You check out the consistency. If I do this the next time, also does it work? And this forms a knowledge system. Now, again, this is experiential learning. Then the wisdom is when you start looking at social systems. You don't look at just communities like religious communities. You don't look at social strata. You look at it as society. Like this is the whole of society, and the flow or the chemistry between each element of the society. Then the concept of identity, there is a lot of questioning on identity that goes on when there is wisdom, or when wisdom is kind of percolating. And you start thinking about cosmic connections, like where did I come from, where did humanity come from, what is my purpose in the world, and so on. And when all this is done consciously, it is called inquiry based learning. Now, selecting the parameters, if you want to do experimental education, you have to be very careful of what are you measuring, what are you picking on. So uh, we can think of gross parameters, which are very large parameters, things like confidence. If a parent says that my child does not have confidence, what does it mean? If someone doesn't have patience, what does that mean? If there is no awareness, what does that mean? And if you want to inculcate all these things, want to develop all these things, then how to go about it? So, for example, if you see that a child does not have confidence, is it because the child lacks executive control? That is, the child, whenever they come in front of someone, they experience fear, they experience insecurity, and are not able to overcome it. If they are able to overcome it, then it shouldn't bother them. Not wanting is a different matter, but not being able to shouldn't means that the child is being bothered by something. So executive control could be one of them. Poise. Um, Poise is again a tangible aspect of confidence. The way somebody stands, the way somebody carries himself or herself, or the way somebody talks. So all this comes in poise. And then there is expression. Whether you are able to articulate your thoughts properly or not, whether you are able to express the things that you want to express. Then when you come to patience, patience will deal with observation. If you are patient, what does that mean? Um, while I am being patient, am I just quiet? Am I observing? Am I analyzing? Am I just curious and seeing what happens? So all these things add to patience. Then awareness, again, if you are aware, that means you are observing things around you. You are concentrating. And here the reason why I've written it like this is because you are, when you look at the etymology of the word concentrate, it is more related to aligning yourself, like getting things to your center. That is why concentrate. And when you do that, um, you are able to pay attention. At the same time, you are also able to focus as per your will, and you are also able to introspect. So these are the elements that make up awareness. So similarly, when you look at parameters that you want to work on, if you're looking at experimental education, then it is very necessary to find out whether you are dealing with things that are complex parameters or they are simple parameters. So if you feel okay, something can be broken down into smaller parts, then you look at those smaller parts and see whether these things are there at least individually in the child or in whoever you are dealing with. Then comes the side effects. Now, I refer to these as side effects because these um outcomes you can never aim for. It's like saying, I'm aiming at the Orion constellation. You cannot aim at the Orion constellation because one, it is too far and it is too vast. Which star are you aiming at? If you're looking at it through a telescope, then are you looking at the star that is the club? Are you looking at the belt? Even in the belt, are you looking at which star are you looking at? So these things are very vast, and these things come up when the individual stars are in place. So academic prowess. When a child is patient, knows delayed gratification, has self-discipline, has confidence, and has the diligence to work about it, then academic prowess comes into view. Otherwise, there's no point even talking about it. There has to be interest in the child for that. And for an interest to be created, there are a lot of other things that we need to first talk about or work on. Then the next is outgoing or social skills. A lot of parents keep saying that my child is not outgoing, my child is not very social, my child does not talk to anyone. What you are observing is just one act, that the child is not talking to someone. But what is the reason behind it? What is going on in the child's mind? What is the child's experience, and how does the child see that relation? Then the concept of maturity and independence. My child is not able to do anything by himself or herself, or this person is very immature, um, just is very volatile. No matter what happens, no matter what mood he is in, you cannot predict how this person is going to react or act. So all these things are side effects if you work on these. So the first step in experimental education is, after the observation part, obviously, which we'll come to very soon, is selecting the parameters. Now, yeah. So for an example, now this will be probably more relatable to most people, because these are things that you can see at your house, in your home. You can see this in schools, in institutions, colleges, wherever. So the first thing is sync. Um, what happens if these parameters are worked on correctly? So everyone will be in sync. So suppose lesson plans. If you have a lesson plan and you have a yeah, okay. So if you have a lesson plan, you need to check how efficient that lesson plan is. If you develop a lesson plan every time and your plan works every time, that means you are in sync with your students. If you have a certain initiative that you take up in an organization and everybody responds to it, everybody takes it up and works on it, that means you are in sync with your employees or colleagues. So the sync is you can say, an exhibition of parameters working correctly. Then the next is peace. So if you need lesser interventions, lesser counseling, lesser um, places where you have to do conflict resolution and so on, then that means the parameters that you have selected and the way you are working is correct. Then numbers, academic performance, as I said, it is a side effect. If all the other things work correctly, then obviously the children, the people will show academic performance, good academic performance. Then beauty, in your campus, in your organization, you will start seeing things that are artistic. You will start seeing things that are warm and cozy and things that draw out emotion from the people looking at it. Maybe you will see different quotes, you will see colorful craft things on the notice board, on the walls, if there is no notice board. So all these things will start popping up here and there. Then happiness, there will be less burnouts. People lesser people will be asking for leaves, and you will see more random acts of kindness. Then the next is the vision. So whatever vision you have for your institution, you will begin to see that your vision is a place that is now reachable. That is, now when you deal with employees, when you deal with colleagues, your conversations are less about guidelines, less about rules, and more about culture. What culture do you have in the organization? How do you interact? What do you respect? What do you follow? And so on. Then you have the society. So you see that your institution is no more just limited to your walls. It goes beyond the society also. Parents notice the difference in their families. They will try to get involved in your institution, in your environment, and so on. And gradually you will notice that your institution, school, work environment is gaining social impact, social prominence. That means more people will talk about you, more people will ask you how you did this, how did you do that, and so on. And the social impact and contagiousness. So a lot of people will, even the people who are, at cutthroat competitions with you, they will start adopting practices that you are doing. They won't Now they won't try to outdo you. They will try to do what you are doing. So that is contagiousness. And then depth. Within your organization, within your people, within your children, you will start noticing that the questions that you get are not just academic, they are not just technical doubts. Now they are questions about life, they are questions about family, they are questions about psychology, mentality, society, and so on. So a deeper level of questioning and inquiry is going on now. So this is a result of choosing correct parameters. Now, this is just an example. If we think about a lesson plan created from the point of view of experimental education, what should it look like? So first of all, unlike the usual lesson plans, Veena ma'am, do you want to say something? Okay. So most lesson plans, you write them down, type it, and store it, and then they are forgotten till the time you need it again for the next class. But what we have generated is called a living lesson plan, where you have to come back to it after it's done, after it has been executed. So in this case, you fill out the normal things that are there. That is your name, that is the name of the teacher and date, and which grade you are teaching, what topic you are teaching, and so on. But in reverse order. So first you decide on the learning outcome, and then you see what vehicles, what tools you have at your disposal. That is the topic that is available, the book chapters or the teaching aids. Now, this is obviously for schools that are conventional. We are not talking about alternative schools right now. So most of what we discuss is reachable for most of the schools, because most of the schools are conventional. But if you think about it like this, you are still within the framework of the curriculum, you're still within the framework of the school, and yet you get a massive opportunity to create a significant change. So this is why you can have something called a living lesson plan, where you do put in all these things, but you begin with the learning outcome. And when you deal with the learning outcome, you have to keep in mind the parameters. So you take a look at the parameters, like we saw here. Yes. So are you looking at poise? Are you looking at executive control? Even in poise, are you looking at enunciation, or is it posture, or are you dealing with curiosity? Do you want to generate curiosity? So you look at the elements, the specific parameters, not the complex or the gross parameters. The gross parameters will manifest themselves when you work well with the specific parameters or elemental parameters. So you look at these kind of things. Um, then after that, you look at the topic that you have, you look at the teaching aids that you have, and then you design something which integrates all these things with a good balance. So this is where the method or the description comes in. So you design things in such a way which has a lot of input from the students. Uh, Not everything is one-sided, not everything is taught, but you leave enough open spaces for people to ask questions. You leave enough open spaces for things to go, things to get distracted on, and see where it goes. Because only then can you see whether the child is actually curious or not. Only then can you see whether the child is interested, and is in alignment with the direction in which you are going, and so on. And based on how the class goes, then you add it to the knowledge gain. You add it to you add whatever you have observed, you add any distractions that you have had. Distraction, the meaning of this in this sequence or in this context, is an extra mode of learning, an extra channel of learning. For example, we were dealing with a chapter called The Fun They Had, which is a story by Isaac Asimov, and it deals with a future where all teachers are robots, and people, like how we just began with the topic of homeschooling and so on. So everybody is homeschooled and everybody has a robotic teacher. um, but then to understand that, we had to think about a lot of things, we had to understand a lot of things. I realized my student did not know the concept of dials. The word dial was used somewhere in the chapter and she did not know the concept of dials. So we spoke about different dials. We spoke about the dial tone. Why is it called a dial tone when you call up someone? So we looked at the old forms of telephone where you had the whole dial where you had to dial the number basically. We approached it from language and then we went into technical things, that the dial that was mentioned in the story, which dial could it refer to? So it could be a voltmeter, it could be an ammeter, things that you use to measure electricity. We came to know later on that in a few of the future chapters, that information came in very handy because she could connect the concept of the dial. It was very easy for her to understand bits and pieces of the next chapters, of the following chapters. We spoke about papyrus, we spoke about ancient forms of writing, ancient forms of paper, and she, having an interest in art, she actually connected to all these things. So all this comes in knowledge gain. So after you have had the session, after you have conducted the class or the session, you have to write down whatever has been gained in that session. So that is what makes it a living lesson plan, so that you have something to reflect on, something to go back to. And then there are some things which you cannot um, include in these specific columns, so that can be written in remarks. So if you notice a specific kind of a behavior, so that will be again put in knowledge gain. um, if you notice a way of learning, a tendency to learn in a certain way, so then that will come in knowledge gain. Okay, so the way we do it is we have made online lesson plans through Google Forms, and these Google Forms are set up in that way. The Excel that we saw, the table that we saw, it is set up in that format. But the power of Google Forms is the filter. So if you see the top row, which says name of the teacher, date, grade, and so on, this is a very, very, very powerful tool for future lesson plans and for understanding modes of learning and so on, because this can be used to pick out key learning outcomes. So if you want to see, of suppose whoever is taking grade 5, how did they manage to take a particular concept with grade 5, and whether it was successful or not. So you just in learning outcomes, you select that learning outcome. In grade, you select that grade, and then you can see the whole thing from how the session was taken, and what other learning outcomes were managed during that session, what was the knowledge gain, and what was the response like. So this makes it very easy. Now, coming to how the parameters are selected, or how to break down gross or complex parameters into smaller ones is if you notice the tendencies. So, for example, if you yeah, this T's and T's is traits and tendencies. So, for example, if someone is self-aware or is developing his or her self-awareness internally by themselves, then you'll notice that they understand and recognize their own strengths and weaknesses. Um, they have high self-esteem and are not afraid to speak up for what they need. So, this kind of a person, if you tell them, okay, can you recite this poem? So the child will say no, because the child is very sure that at this moment, I don't want to perform in front of somebody else. This is not what I'm here for. That is high self-esteem. And if you push them enough, uh, then they will also come up with this response. I don't want to do it now. I'm not in the mood to do it now. Then this high self-esteem and courage to speak up can also be seen in other social situations like peer meets, like when friends are hanging out and somebody, when they grow older, if somebody offers the other child a cigarette, not child but whatever, another child a cigarette, then this person will very frankly and very in an even tone say no, because the child is very sure that this is not something that I want to partake in. This is not something that I want to, this is not a direction I want to go in. So it's no more about just right or wrong. It is also about knowing what you need and what you don't, and what you want and what you don't. They know that how they see themselves may not be the same as how others see them. They understand that parents see them as children, so that is why at times they will behave as children. They understand that in the school they have certain roles, they have certain responsibilities between the friends, between the teachers, and that is how they will respond to them, while at the same time keeping their individuality intact. They will not sacrifice that for the sake of somebody else's expectations. They choose delayed gratification. If they are given pocket money and they are taken to a toy shop, and they know that they really want a toy, but then it will finish off all their pocket money, and they will not get to do things that they have decided on, they have planned for. So in that case they will abstain, they will not spend their pocket money on things like that. Now all these things will happen automatically if the child is self-aware. Now, what do you observe? These are traits and tendencies which you notice by chance. You cannot, like, these are not things that you can measure. But then, what are the things that you can measure, you can check without obviously messing around with the child, without playing psychological games or training the child in any way or conditioning the child in any way? So, typical observations that you can see for a child who is self aware: they will ask for help when needed. If they are given a task from school and if they are doing the task, even if they are struggling, they are sitting with a blank piece of paper and not doing anything, leave them be. If they ask for help, that means they know their strengths and weaknesses, and that means they have the courage to ask for help when it is needed. They recognize when others need help and help them. So if you are self aware, it obviously means you're also aware of things that are affecting yourself. So that is the environment, your immediate environment. It pains you when somebody is not able to achieve, is getting frustrated, and is actually bothered by it. It bothers you also. So when you recognize something like this happening and then they reach out to help, that means they recognize when others need help and they go ahead and help them. Next, They are very clear about their likes and dislikes. This we already spoke about. If somebody is putting you on stage and this is not what they like, they will refrain from it. And it's not like they'll throw a tantrum over it or anything. They'll just very plainly say, this is not what I want to do. They voice out their opinions. If they feel something is wrong, if they feel something is going bad, then they'll say it. If they feel that a certain person acted or behaved wrongly, but at the same time they were correct in their own sense, in their own standing in the situation that they were in, they will say that. So they'll voice out their opinions. They ask questions and listen to answers. Now, this is something that I like to test out every now and then. Because children are curious, they will ask questions. So if they ask that question and they wait for the answer, it means that that is a big yes for self-awareness. Most of the children, you will notice, they have the questions, they cannot contain the questions. They'll ask one question, and by the time you are trying to answer that question, they'll come up with the second question. They'll come up with the third question. They'll probably run out of the room because a friend has called them. They won't wait for the answer. But if they have asked a question and they are listening to the answer and maybe even responding to it once you are done answering them, you can be sure that at least the seeds of self-awareness are there. Then when given a choice between something attractive and immediate, so now this is an elaboration of the delayed gratification part. When given a choice between something attractive and immediate versus something useful and long term, they will choose the long term and useful opportunity or object. For example, if someone says, okay, oh, today you have a holiday in school. So, okay, we have two choices. We can either go to the bank and open a bank account for you, or we can spend some time in the park. So, if the child understands that, okay, banks are meant for saving money, um, and it would be good to have a bank account. And if I keep storing money, if I keep storing my pocket money and so on from today, maybe over the period of 5 years or something, I'll have a significant sum of money or something like that. Then they will obviously choose the bank account over the park. On the other hand, if you give them another choice, would you like to go to a museum or would you like to go to a movie? Yeah. So they will obviously choose something which is productive. They will understand what is good for me and they will choose that. So this is another observation. Now questions, now these are things which help sow the seeds of self-awareness. For example, labeling emotions. If the children learn to label their emotions, a lot of problems get solved. If a child, most of the children, the reason why they cannot control their aggression is because they don't know that they are angry. They don't understand anger. They don't understand emotions. So if gradually they start understanding, putting labels, putting names for these, and then they have a name for it. Then they have an understanding of what situation they are in. So you can ask them, how do you think a friend feels right now? If there is some incident, like for example, this lockdown thing that is going on right now. If you ask them, how do you think your friends feel right now? So that gives them a question. Am I experiencing the same things that my friends are experiencing? Are my friends experiencing the same way that I am experiencing this lockdown? Then in movies or in uh, even in society, while you are taking a walk or something like that, when you look at the people around you, if you ask the child, what does his face tell you? So if you see someone selling ice creams and you're selling ice creams to children, it is very natural to feel happy in that kind of a position. No matter how hard you have worked for it and no matter what your financial situation is. But if the person who is selling ice cream is genuinely upset, you know there is something wrong. So what does his face tell you? I'm thinking you must be really sad and we could, okay. I'm thinking you must be really sad because we could not go to the park today. So, when you notice an emotion in a child, instead of reacting and saying, stop throwing tantrums or don't do this, don't do that, uh, go to your room or something like that, uh, when you voice out what you have noticed, if you see that the child is angry and you say, okay, I can understand that you are upset, then you say that. So this is labeling emotions. Then giving real grounded feedback. So I know it can be hard to wait our turn for something we really like. It takes a lot of practice. So when you say things like that, the child is more understanding. The child tries to take a step into somebody else's shoes. Um, you perfectly maintained your balance on the bicycle today. I am so proud of you. So in the first case, you could have very well stated that you are impatient. You are not doing this well. This is not what the rules say. You are acting against the rules. Instead of all these things, if you can very specifically give the feedback which the child can see, understand, and act on, that is a grounded feedback. That is a real feedback. In the second sense, if you are cycling, if you are cycling very well, just saying that you cycle very nicely or you cycle very well doesn't really give view to the person who is doing that activity. So, which is why it is necessary to give real and grounded feedback. Then making observations explicit. Um, I can tell this really matters to you. Do you want to talk about it? If you see someone restless, why are they restless? Try to observe, try to learn from the person, and then reflect with the person. So whatever you are observing, if you notice that someone is pacing, so you ask them, okay, is something bothering you? I see that you are pacing constantly. So instead of jumping to conclusions that you didn't get to go to the park, so you are throwing tantrums, you get to the heart of the matter by taking steps with the child. Then I was so excited when they called your name. What was going through your mind at that moment? So again, the same thing. If you notice a certain thing, you notice an expression, but instead of just labeling it as a particular expression for a particular feeling, then you can just ask what was going on. Then the next one is aids. What aids are you using to give all this? So like drama, dance, choice, involvement, household chores. So household chores can help you understand humility and so on. So I'll just give me a second. You can take a look at this till then. I'll leave this on for a few seconds. Okay. So when you do all these things, drama, dance are very good ways to understand emotion. They are very good ways to understand energy and so on. Um, when you do all these things over a long term, the effect of self-awareness will show in other things. First is clear prioritization. you won't face that issue, after growing up, you don't know what to do or so on. um, at the very least, you know what you like and what you don't like and what you would like to keep doing, so that will help you orient yourself towards what you want to do or what the child wants to do. Then mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness will not be a practice that will be taught or you need to be trained in. It is something that will occur naturally. You will take time to sit in silence, you will take time to observe things around you, you will take time to be mindful of the things around you. Then critical thinking is also something that will happen automatically when you really look into, inquire into the depth of a problem, an issue, or just any circumstance. Okay. So a few things that we do in our school, and we are what a few things that we are working on. So the previous sheet that you saw is how you can qualitatively evaluate children. Instead of just giving them marks, if you help um, your parents, your teachers, your whoever you are interacting with, understand how this kind of a qualitative evaluation works, then they will now start looking at really observing children, observing themselves, observing their society, to understand what is happening instead of just reacting on things on a day-to-day basis. So qualitative evaluations need to be developed for the future. Now the next is feedbacks. So sorry, another thing is no marks. If you do give marks, the whole problem of this is that it draws attention of the child, of everyone in the campus, to one single point, and that is a very problematic place to be. So there shouldn't be any marks, at least till grade 6. Then obviously, if you are in a conventional system, then it is necessary. Then feedbacks. So when you have feedback forms or feedback for the children, as you notice for the self-awareness sheet that I just shared, the questions were very different. The questions were very specific, unlike things that we normally notice. Like, this person has the tendency to talk behind people's back. Why? Why does this person have that tendency, and is it with everyone? Where did that person learn it from, and is it something uh, that is it true, first of all? So we really need to look at specific things, and we need to form tailor-made questions for it. So after this, if we have time, I'll share the feedback form that we have given to the parents recently, which will help you get a better idea. So the form, just to give you a gist, the form is made in such a way that while filling the form, the parents realize how much the child has learned. Because since we are a semi-alternative school, Nivam, the school is a semi-alternative school, um, quite a few times what happens is the things that we really celebrate and we feel are things that are very difficult to inculcate in children, but the children are absorbing them and learning them at a much younger age. um, they are not very much understood by society, they are not very much understood by parents. Parents are still obsessed with things like, is my child learning robotics, is my child learning abcd, is my child learning to write, is my child learning to code. So recently, now this whole coding fashion has come up, that my every child should learn how to code and so on. So if you turn this, if you are able to turn this into questions like, is my child happy, is my child mature, and so on, um, this can be done with very specific questions. So we ask those kind of questions. We ask things like, does the child like to solve problems? Is the child interested in things that they do? How long does the child sit with one particular activity, and so on. Then after that, we ask questions which make even the parent, because quite a few of the parents always are in that impression that if they have paid the fees, that means they have sold the rights to the child, so to speak. So everything else has to be done by the school, and they just have to sit back and watch. Um, in these kind of questions, like if you ask the question that what do you expect from yourself as a parent, and then after that you put questions such as what do you expect from children, what do you expect, um, yeah, expect from the child, and then very wisely if you put in the question that do you have any uh, comments for the school. So uh, you should understand what tone you are giving to the question for the feedback, and this also gives lays the seeds for future interactions. So if the parent fills this form, the next time if the parent fills the same form and compares what did I expect from myself the last time and what did I expect from my child the last time, and what how has the situation changed this time. So that is how feedbacks work. Then knowledge gain sheets. So one thing that we follow in a school is cross audits. So whenever a teacher is free, they have to ensure that they are in somebody else's class. So we have constant cross auditing where teachers from pre-primary audit the classes of primary, teachers from primary observe the classes of pre-primary. So this gives major opportunity for mutual learning from each other, and also at the same time it helps in giving tips to that person, or even understanding from the um, person's perspective, the other teacher's perspective, how they are looking at the class, and what did they say and what did I see. So this adds to the knowledge. Then you have checklists and SOPs. So these are things that we are developing right now based on the knowledge gain sheets. So if we have done a lot of cross audits, then there has to be a future, right? It can't just be data that one teacher has attended 6 sessions. Then what happened after that? So we have to record all these, and this has to go somewhere in sheets, in Excel sheets or through Google Forms and then Google Sheets. Uh, and this has to be recorded in a manner that is searchable, trackable, and usable. So this can be turned into knowledge gain sheets. So very simple sheets. You observe a class. What did you observe? What did you learn? And how would you do things differently? Something like this. So this is how cross audits work. Then these cross audits give rise to checklists and checklists and SOPs. So the next time if you have to do something like this, if you have to conduct a class, then what should you keep in mind? Then consistency. So your data always has to be consistent. Whatever you have recorded, all the questions, all the data that you have collected, it has to be consistent. If you observe a particular class for a day and you have given your inputs, you have learned from it, and then you don't attend that teacher's class for the next 3-4 months, that is not consistency. You If you observe a child and you are learning what the child is learning, it makes sense if you observe the child at least for a week. So this consistency has to happen. Then software and resources. So quite a few of these, I'm sure a lot of you know. We use Dropbox, we use Google Drive. We have begun using Google Drive more because of the ease of Google Forms, so that irrespective of how technologically problematic your staff is or the people in your organization are, all they have to do is fill a form. So if they fill a form, you automatically get data which is searchable, which is trackable, and which can be worked on. Then Google Scholar. So this is again something that we have started doing recently. So quite a few times we keep reading these articles that it is like the coding thing, that the research shows that children should learn coding at a very early age and it will benefit them a lot. So which research? What paper was it published in? What journal was it published in? Is there really such a paper? Was there really such a study which said anything about coding and its relation to children's knowledge or children's learning? So verify everything. Just because somebody else is doing it does not mean you follow. Verify each and everything that you hear about, everything that you read about. So Google Scholar is a good place to check, and Sci-Hub is a place where you can get papers which you cannot very easily get on Google Scholar. So if you just search for these terms online, you will find a lot of information on them and how to use them efficiently. Now, designing these experiments. So this is kind of self-explanatory. So the first part is obviously you observe things that are happening around you, and you notice what actions are happening, what patterns are taking place. You infer the behavior and analysis. You check whether this supposition, this theory that you have, that if suppose you see a child hits another child, you see this happening with multiple children, you see this happening across classes. So that means that there is aggression in your school. Now, you need to check why this aggression is happening. So you check the consistency. Till where is it consistent and where does the consistency break? So, for example, if we notice that there is a lot of aggression in our school till the annual day practices begin, then once the annual day practices begin, then there is no aggression or little aggression. So that means till the time there is no higher aim, or there is no purpose that is drawing all of them together, there is a chance of aggression. So that means quite a few of these children probably lack direction in their life. So which means they need a good schedule at home, because in the school we already have a schedule. So you check the consistency of where this is happening. Then designing. So now that you know that the children need direction, so how do we create that direction? So part one of designing is selection of parameters. If you have selected direction as one of the parameters, are there any other parameters you want to work on? Can you work on multiple parameters? Can you use parameters that the children already are adept at to develop this new parameter? So those of you who have joined a little bit late, parameters are characteristics of children which are very basic. So one simple parameter is um, how a child is standing. So with the spine erect or things like that. Another very simple parameter is how what is the reaction time of a child. So does the child react very quickly? Then next is how the child reacts to problems. The moment the child sees that, oh, this is a problem, I do not want to talk to this person, but I have to talk to this person now. How does the child react? So social problems, intellectual problems, that is mathematical, scientific problems, and physical problems, jumping over a wall or something like that. So these are the kind of parameters. So you select the parameters that you want to select, and you start playing around with them, and you start thinking about them. How can you arrange them? How can you work on them? And you start building a story that, okay, these are the parameters I need to work on. What are natural places where these parameters are what are the natural places where children face these parameters. So you develop that story and you start refining, you start fine tuning, because uh, when you write a story, it's more like a sketch. So you start turning it into a story that everybody can participate in, everybody can follow. So one simple way is we follow integral education. So the three principles of integral education are: nothing can be taught. So these parameters are not things that you can instruct children in. They have to be faced, as in they have to be experienced by the children. So nothing can be taught. Now, near to far is the next one. So for the sake of introducing a parameter, if in Amravati I start talking about the American culture, it's not something that people here will relate to. Yes, people have heard of America because a lot of people from Amravati have the tendency to move um, to bigger cities and ultimately out of the country. So America is one of those countries. So that the child can understand, but the child does not understand the American culture. So how can you give the American context? So it has to be near to far. It is something that it must be something that the child can relate to. Something at home, something in the city, or something in the school is preferable. So you have to consider the social and the physical terrain, the people around you, the social, the traditions and the culture around you, and the geography. So, for example, it's not very easy to understand an ice-capped mountain in Amravati because we don't have those. But we do have hills and we do have mountains. We have green mountains. So physical terrain also matters. Then consulting the child's mind in its growth. You have to understand the inclinations of a child. Just because you want to teach patience, you cannot uh, just have one aggressive child and a patient child sitting together. Because then the aggressive child will start testing the patient child. So you have to understand who you are dealing with. So you have to consult the child's mind in its growth. If a child likes art, if a child likes painting or drawing or music, look at all those things. Then play ball. So you set the stage, you observe what is happening, have a matlab, set the stage and start, then observe how it goes, and then you discuss and analyze. And most importantly, record everything. So whatever you have observed, whatever knowledge you have gained has to go back in the living lesson plan. Now, some do's and don'ts when you think of these things. So you have to be okay with throwing everything out of the window if things are derailing. Just because you have spent hours and hours making a lesson plan does not mean that you stick to the lesson plan. You have to be okay with things going sideways. And yes, but when they do go sideways, you have to record everything. Where did you start noticing that, this is not something that we can do today, and what followed? So that also has to be recorded and it has to go in the knowledge game. Then look at the bigger picture. For example, playing with a dog. So when you play with a dog, you will start noticing that it's a play. It's how you respond to the dog and the dog responds to you. So if you raise a hand very slowly, then the dog sees that as something suspicious. If you just raise it normally without looking at the dog doesn't react. And on the other hand, if you raise it very fast looking at the dog, that also is something that the dog reacts to. So you play with the dog and then you realize how everything that happens around the children creates an impact on the child. At the same time, this is also something that affects you. So you also have to make sure that you let go of that ego, because you have planned something, it doesn't go well. That is fine. It's okay, but Just make sure that you keep the records for everything. Then take the extra effort to do nothing. Quite a few times, this is a very common concept between most of the educators. It takes a lot of effort to do nothing, because you'll notice that there are a lot of places where you feel very strongly to do something, like just touch the child's back or shoulder or something, so that they get aligned, or you feel like saying something because it is right there, it is so plain and simple. But you do not help the child, do not interfere till the time they ask for it. So take that extra effort to do nothing. Then data. Always ensure whatever you are doing has to be written. If it is not on paper, it didn't happen. Always ensure that everything that has happened has been noted down well, and in a way that is usable in the future. Then, yeah, so this is a process, right? So you study with fellow educators, you find out what they think about it. Have they faced something similar? What is their research experience in it? Do your own research, record your own results, and analyze it by yourself and with the group of educators, your study group, who you discuss these things with. You can discuss with them also, but before that, analyze it by yourself. Then discuss it with the students also. This is also very important. Quite a few times we just assume that children are part of the plan. It Children are the plan. They are not your plan. They are the plan where you are interacting with them. So ensure that you do interact with them, discuss the activity with them. Fine, if you want to discuss it at the end, it is fine, but you ensure that you discuss it with them. Then do not contaminate the experiment. Maintain neutrality at all costs. If people are angry and if people are trying to resolve a conflict, if you also get angry, you are adding on to the problem. If you lose your patience in a class, you are adding to the sideways chemistry of the class. So you have to maintain neutrality at all costs. Never use the word experiment with the parents. They'll freak out, they'll run away. So this is the last tip. Whenever you are dealing with parents, do not say that you are doing experimental education. Do not say that you are performing an experiment, because the word experiment is not very well understood by people as such. So this is what we were talking about. The most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, is not eureka, but that's funny. So this is the one about Alexander Fleming. When he discovered penicillin, at that time he said that that's funny. He didn't start jumping around the room and saying that I've discovered something, but he was interested in it, and he was interested in it purely and deeply. So that's it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, we are open for questions now.